Very few people experience something so horrifying at a young age that it haunts them forever. I'm one of those unfortunate souls. I was maybe 7 or 8 years old when the terror began. My older brother and I grew up in a fractured household. Our mom was our only guardian. Our dad vanished from our lives, leaving a void. Our mom toiled away at 2 jobs to keep us afloat. On nights she worked late, our grandma would stay over to watch us. My brother Austin is 2 years younger than me. Despite our situation, we were lucky to have our own rooms. We lived in a modest house, but for the 3 of us and on our mom's income alone, it was a sanctuary. The neighborhood, however, was far from safe. It was a night like any other. Or so I thought. I can't remember if it was a school night or if it was a weekend. But the air felt different. I don't remember any tiny details like that, but what I do remember is I was in the living room with my grandma. And an unsettling silence hung in the air. She was watching TV, and I was playing with Legos on my Lego table. The only sounds were the clinking of the bricks and the low hum of the television. I was being loud and making a mess with them because I remember my grandma kept saying, "Alex, quiet down." Her voice had a hint of worry. Austin was already in bed. My bedtime was 9:30. But tonight felt different. Given that, it was probably approaching that time. The clock ticking louder than usual. I'm guessing this was a weekend night, otherwise my bedtime would have been earlier. But the night felt endless. The layout of the house was simple. Living room, dining room, and kitchen are all connected. But tonight, the shadows seemed to stretch longer. And then there was a hallway which led to the bathroom and 3 bedrooms. The hallway felt like a tunnel. Our mom's bedroom was at the end of the hall. A dark void at the end of the corridor. Mine was in the middle. The door creaking eerily. Our grandma would sleep in our mom's bed when she'd stay over to watch us. Her presence a comforting shield against the unknown. Eventually I had to go to sleep. But the night felt heavy with anticipation. My grandma would always go to sleep early too, so right after saying goodnight to me, her voice trembling slightly, she would go to the bathroom to brush her teeth and stuff before going to sleep as well. The house growing eerily quiet. I was never one to be afraid of the dark or anything. My mom says I used to be a really brave child. But that night, I woke up in the middle of the night. Something unusual for me because I remember myself being a very heavy sleeper. I heard something outside in the hallway, creaks in the floor. The wood floors in that house were always very creaky. Anytime someone walked down the hall, you'd hear it. I thought my grandma was going to the bathroom. However, the creaking didn't stop. It sounded like the creaks were moving back and forth almost as if someone was pacing. I got out of bed and went to the door to listen. Now I heard whispering, faint and eerie. I was more confused than anything. I thought my grandma was talking to Austin. I opened the door and looked into the hallway, and what I saw still haunts me to this day. There was a tall, naked, skinny woman leaning on the wall with her head between her arms, her hair hanging like a curtain. She was whispering incoherently to herself, and then, like a deer in headlights, her head whipped around to look at me, her eyes wide and wild. I screamed for my grandma like a little girl and slammed my door shut, my heart pounding in my chest. There were pounds on my door, and the woman on the other side was screaming a name. "Jeremy! Jeremy, open the door!" I kept screaming as loud as I could for my grandma, and I heard her scream in the hallway. What I distinctly remember was my grandma screaming, "Get the _ out of here!" The woman screamed, "Where is Jeremy?" My grandma was in her mid-60s at the time, and she was still pretty quick. She yelled at me to keep my door locked, and she managed to fend off this crazy woman, as she also called the police at the same time. I don't know how she did it, but my grandma was one tough woman. The woman left the house screaming, "Jeremy!" and after locking the door, my grandma came to hug both me and Austin, who was awake and also crying from the commotion. We all sat huddled together until the police came. By that time, my grandma told us to just go back to sleep. This simply was a matter of my grandma not locking one of the doors mixed with living in an already shady area. That woman had to be on crack or something. Seeing what I saw at such a young age did a number on me. I couldn't sleep alone for a long time. It was this incident that really resulted in us moving out of that house not long after. Let me give you some chilling context before the story begins. When I was 19 years old, I lived a seemingly normal life. I had just finished high school the year before the haunting occurred. I had always been drawn to the macabre. Whether it was movies, games, spine-chilling jump scares, you name it, and I was obsessed. I never seemed to be afraid of anything, and I loved that it allowed me to venture into the unknown. appearing tougher to girls who I was interested in at the time or who were interested in me. Thought of it almost like a superpower. My friend had always talked about this REM-induced real-life nightmare called sleep paralysis. I, however, had never experienced such a thing. My friend Megan suffered from extreme lucid dreaming. She explained to me several times about how certain stimulators or outside factors could play into her dreams and mold them into what could potentially be a heavenly experience full of fun and wonder, or could just as easily turn into a bone-chilling nightmare straight out of hell. Being the light sleeper I am, I saw no chance of it occurring, so I kind of just let it go right over my head. One night, Megan texted me and asked me to come over as she had just suffered another so-called evil experience due to her sleep condition. When I arrived, I found her asleep again, seemingly peacefully. I took a seat on her stool that she had for her makeup dresser right by the window and started playing a game on my phone. 30 minutes or so went by and I figured she was peacefully asleep, and it would probably be okay for me to leave as long as I let her know that I stopped by as she requested. But suddenly, Megan awoke and started screaming. This was a different kind of scream though, a type of scream I had never heard before, especially from her. It was almost mumbled, I don't know how else to describe it. Her eyes bulged open, and I ran over to her side. I asked her if she was having a bad dream. She started shaking. I grabbed a hold of her to try to calm her down, but the tremors grew. I asked her what was going on, but no response. I figured this was just another one of her so-called sleep paralysis episodes. I did my best to comfort her. After about 30 or so seconds went by, she regained full control of her body. I made sure she was okay and I left back for my house as it was almost 1 a.m. Right as I got home, I received a very panicked text reading, "The hallucinations won't stop." I asked her to clarify what she meant, but no response. After about 30 minutes went by, I took it upon myself to head back over to her place. When I arrived, I noticed the illumination of red and blue covering her front porch and the surrounding road signs. I ran up to her house, desperately trying to find out what happened. As I approached the house, I noticed Megan was speaking with one of the officers on the scene. When I went up to talk to her, Megan and the officer walked me over to a more secluded area. What I found out still sends chills up my spine to this day. Apparently, when I'd gone over to Megan's that night, she wasn't asleep at all. She was pretending to be. Evidently right behind me was a tall, skinny, homeless man hiding in her closet. The police had also found a very large kitchen knife on him as well. The theory to this day is Megan thought she was having an episode when in reality this very real man was quietly creeping towards her in her bedroom. Supposedly, when I had entered her house, it was enough to spook the man into hiding, and my presence was enough to keep him hidden. This gave Megan the time to call 911 and report the situation, which in turn resulted in the police arriving almost immediately after I had left. Thankfully, the man was taken into custody rather quickly. To this day, I don't know what to think about that night, other than I could have very easily saved her life simply by keeping her company during what I thought was a very stressful situation, which in turn could have resulted in some very scary and heinous acts that would have taken place if I had been there any later. I hope I never experience such a thing. That would be what finally trips my fear factor without a doubt. Around 10 years ago, I moved out of my mom's house into my first apartment in the city of Chicago. The place was a nice 3-bedroom apartment on the south side of the city in a friendly neighborhood by the University of Illinois. I lived with 2 roommates, Tom and Mike. Mike was a good friend of mine while Tom was a good friend of Mike's who I had not met prior, although we ended up getting along just fine. One night, about a month after moving in, I met up with a few friends of mine for drinks at a bar more in the center of the city around 10 minutes from my place. It was a good time and I ended up getting Thought of it almost like a superpower. My friend had always talked about this REM-induced real-life nightmare called sleep paralysis. I, however, had never experienced such a thing. My friend Megan suffered from extreme lucid dreaming. She explained to me several times about how certain stimulators or outside factors could play into her dreams and mold them into what could potentially be a heavenly experience full of fun and wonder, or could just as easily turn into a bone-chilling nightmare straight out of hell. Being the light sleeper I am, I saw no chance of it occurring, so I kind of just let it go right over my head. One night, Megan texted me and asked me to come over as she had just suffered another so-called evil experience due to her sleep condition. When I arrived, I found her asleep again, seemingly peacefully. I took a seat on her stool that she had for her makeup dresser right by the window and started playing a game on my phone. 30 minutes or so went by and I figured she was peacefully asleep, and it would probably be okay for me to leave as long as I let her know that I stopped by as she requested. But suddenly, Megan awoke and started screaming. This was a different kind of scream though, a type of scream I had never heard before, especially from her. It was almost mumbled, I don't know how else to describe it. Her eyes bulged open, and I ran over to her side. I asked her if she was having a bad dream. She started shaking. I grabbed a hold of her to try to calm her down, but the tremors grew. I asked her what was going on, but no response. I figured this was just another one of her so-called sleep paralysis episodes. I did my best to comfort her. After about 30 or so seconds went by, she regained full control of her body. I made sure she was okay, and I left back for my house as it was almost 1 a.m. Right as I got home, I received a very panicked text reading, "The hallucinations won't stop." I asked her to clarify what she meant, but no response. After about 30 minutes went by, I took it upon myself to head back over to her place. When I arrived, I noticed the illumination of red and blue covering her front porch and the surrounding road signs. I ran up to her house, desperately trying to find out what happened. As I approached the house, I noticed Megan was speaking with one of the officers on the scene. When I went up to talk to her, Megan and the officer walked me over to a more secluded area. What I found out still sends chills up my spine to this day. Apparently, when I'd gone over to Megan's that night, she wasn't asleep at all. She was pretending to be. Evidently right behind me was a tall, skinny homeless man hiding in her closet. The police had also found a very large kitchen knife on him as well. The theory to this day is Megan thought she was having an episode when in reality this very real man was quietly creeping towards her in her bedroom. Supposedly, when I had entered her house, it was enough to spook the man into hiding, and my presence was enough to keep him hidden. This gave Megan the time to call 911 and report the situation, which in turn resulted in the police arriving almost immediately after I had left. Thankfully, the man was taken into custody rather quickly. To this day, I don't know what to think about that night, other than I could have very easily saved her life simply by keeping her company during what I thought was a very stressful situation, which in turn could have resulted in some very scary and heinous acts that would have taken place if I had been there any later. I hope I never experience such a thing. That would be what finally trips my fear factor without a doubt. Around 10 years ago, I moved out of my mom's house into my first apartment in the city of Chicago. The place was a nice 3-bedroom apartment on the south side of the city in a friendly neighborhood by the University of Illinois. I lived with 2 roommates, Tom and Mike. Mike was a good friend of mine while Tom was a good friend of Mike's who I had not met prior, although we ended up getting along just fine. One night, about a month after moving in, I met up with a few friends of mine for drinks at a bar more in the center of the city around 10 minutes from my place. It was a good time, and I ended up getting slightly drunk before getting into a cab at 1 a.m. and heading home. Upon walking into my apartment, I noticed that Tom's door was open, showing that he was staying at his girlfriend's place, while Mike's door was closed with the light from his TV shining underneath the crack. I'd made my way to my bedroom and put on my own TV before lying down to prepare for sleep. After around 10 minutes, I heard my doorbell ring. Half asleep, I woke up confused as it was 1:30 in the morning, so I ignored it. A few seconds later, the doorbell rang again, and then again a few seconds after that. It's important to mention that my roommate Mike had a good amount of cash by dealing weed to a few people. He was also a huge stoner himself, so the idea that he fell asleep while waiting for a late-night customer to come over was not out of the realm of possibility. With this in mind, I went over to my intercom and asked who was there. A girl's voice answered back, "It's Emma, I'm here to see Mike." Thinking that my suspicions had been confirmed, I exited out of my front door and headed down the stairs. The door to the outside of our apartment building was made of tall glass so you could easily identify any potential visitors. Here I saw an attractive college-age blonde girl with glasses waiting patiently outside. I had never seen this person before. However, she appeared to be non-threatening. And besides having random customers over to grab weed, Mike would also have some random girls over to hook up with from time to time. Because of this, I let my guard down slightly and cracked the door open. The girl then repeated what she had said moments earlier over the intercom. "Hi, I'm here to see Mike." I replied, "Okay, he's here, just follow me up," and I held the door open for her. She grabbed the handle and I turned around to head back up the stairs. As I was walking back up, I quickly noticed that this Emma girl was not following me up. I glanced over my shoulder and saw that she was still standing outside holding the door open, only now she was staring off to her right, almost as if waiting for someone. At this moment, a tidal wave of fear crashed over me as I realized something horrible was more than likely about to happen. I continued walking up to my place quicker now. After turning the corner of the stairs, I heard the door swing open and then heavy footsteps running up the stairs behind me. I looked over my shoulder again, and what I saw shook me to my core. A tall, gangly man with sunken eyes, greasy long hair down to his shoulders, was running up the stairs straight at me. He was wearing a sleeveless black t-shirt, and apart from the cheap-looking tribal tattoos I saw creeping up his arms, I noticed he was also holding what looked like a lead pipe in his right hand. At this moment my body shot full of adrenaline as I turned around and raced back up the stairs. I stood facing the now closed door, paralyzed as the man hit the door 3 more times while shouting obscenities at me. He eventually gave up and ran down the stairs and out the front. Instead of going down to let her in himself, Mike buzzed her up after just hearing her name, with his train of thought being him thinking that she was a friend of mine. When she reached the door to our unit, he opened it and let her in. He said it seemed like she was confused, mentioning that she was looking for someone named Tim. Mike responded by saying his own name, that no one named Tim lived here. He mentioned she stayed near the entrance of the unit and kept reaching behind her to make sure the door stayed open before leaving only a few moments later. After hearing this, my theory is that these same people came earlier in the day and, not expecting to have someone just let them up through the buzzer, the girl made the mistake of forgetting to keep the door to the building open, rendering the attacker unable to enter during this first attempt. Either way, we both got extremely lucky that night. We did call the police, who arrived and asked for more information about what happened. They asked if there was anyone we knew who might want to do us harm, and we answered no, which was the truth, as this seemed to be a completely random attack. The cops left soon after, saying that there was nothing much they could do. We never saw that Emma girl or her scumbag partner again. This story happened to me 4 years ago when I was in my mid-20s. This whole experience will probably scar me for life, and it's still vividly imprinted in my mind. The day was the 15th of June, and I had the house to myself because my parents were on a 2-week vacation in France. It was sometime after dusk, probably around 8 o'clock in the evening, and the weather was scorchingly hot. Believe me when I say I was sweating my ass off with just my tank top and shorts on. The heat was so unbearable that I allowed in some fresh air, opening all the living room and bedroom windows, planning on closing them right before hitting the hay. Now, before fast-forwarding, I must mention that I was feeling extremely exhausted. On that same day I had taken 3 exams in the morning and played a volleyball match in the afternoon. Thus, once I ate my dinner while browsing social media in my room, I collapsed into bed without even realizing it. I woke up at around 3 in the morning to the muffled sounds of thunderbolts and a draft of cold, fresh air hitting my face. A strong wind was blowing and all the shutters left open were noisily banging. Still drowsy, I flicked on the lamp but the light wouldn't turn on. I checked the plug using my phone flashlight but everything was fine. I begrudgingly climbed out of bed and looked out my bedroom window. There were menacing rainy black clouds on the horizon. A typical late-night summer storm was approaching. Given that every lamppost in the street was off, I instantly knew there had been a blackout. Phone flashlight in hand, I dizzily headed down the hallway to shut the windows closed before rain started pouring down. When I got to the last window though, I noticed the mosquito net lifted up. This struck me as weird since I was quite positive I hadn't left it that way. Getting a little paranoid, I turned behind me to shine the flashlight around the living room and check my surroundings. The furniture was still in place, no drawers or closet doors left open, no decorative objects missing or moved in unfamiliar positions. Everything seemed normal. I briefly peeked my head out of my window to look outside, trees swaying in the howling wind, leaves shaking in a frenzy, a powerful display of nature's force, but still, nothing remotely suspicious. Maybe the mechanism is faulty, or the strong wind somehow pushed it up. Against my better judgment, I convinced myself it was useless to lose sleep over it. Feeling relieved, I closed the shutters and started walking back to my bedroom, eager to get a decent night's rest. Little did I know that night would be anything but pleasant. I happened to casually turn my head to the flight of stairs, connected to the attic, when a vivid burst of light flashing from up there caught my eyes. I paid it no mind. The attic was adorned with huge glass windows, so it was no wonder to see lights spreading across the room. It was probably sheet lightning. I kept walking, subconsciously waiting for the thunder to come, but it never did. I stopped in my tracks. Given that the flash I saw was powerful and bright, the lightning had to be pretty close, so why couldn't any rumbling noise be heard? I started to think maybe it wasn't lightning. What if it was a flashlight? As doubt crept in, my heart began to race. I quickly put two and two together, and now the strange occurrence of the mosquito net left up made much more sense. The nightmarish realization hit me that an intruder could have broken into my house. At first I panicked. Did they hear me shutting the windows? Were they carrying any weapons? Did they plan on just robbing my house, or did they also have worse intentions? Normally I would call my parents to deal with it, but since they were away, it was all on me now. While those sickening thoughts were swirling in my mind, the distinct sound of a doorknob being twisted and turned made me instantly snap out of my catatonic state. I shot my head to face the living room entrance, and through the glass frame I spotted a shadowy figure just a few inches outside of the front door. There was a person standing there, most likely an accomplice of the guy upstairs. Words are not enough to describe how powerless and defenseless I felt. Despite the overwhelming fear, I did my best to keep my cool, trying to make as little noise as possible. I tiptoed in the direction of the stairs leading down to the basement, which was directly connected to the garage. I figured I could safely escape from there. While I was making my descent down, still using my phone as a source of light, I dialed 911 and, speaking as softly as possible, I informed the operator about what just happened. He tried to calm me down and reassured me that the police would be there in less than 10 minutes. He also added I should lock myself in a safe room and wait for the officers to show up. I was about to reply that I could easily sneak outside through the garage door when all of a sudden, I lost the call. I immediately checked the phone and realized that down there, I had no signal. As if it wasn't enough, I also noticed the battery was almost dead. The escape? Once I reached the basement, I nervously assessed what to do. I could try and find an emergency flashlight, but now I was so close to escaping from the house that I didn't want to waste time rummaging through the drawers. Besides, I was mindful that the intruders upstairs could have heard me. So, in the heat of the moment, I exited the basement as fast as I could. Nonetheless, while making my way towards the garage door, I got a feeling in my gut telling me I was being watched. I don't even know why, maybe my sixth sense had picked up on something, but I pointed my phone to illuminate the back seats of my car, and there he was. A man's face stuck to the rearview mirror. A disgusting, revolting face with dead, bulging white eyes and a malicious yellowish grin spreading across its cheeks. He kept staring at me so intently, it almost looked like he was piercing into my soul. He slid his dirty hand against the glass, waving me home in an unnatural slow motion. And at that point, it happened. My phone battery died, turning off the flashlight and leaving me in the middle of total darkness. I felt my heart in my throat. I had never been more scared in my entire life. My whole body was quivering and shaking in fear. When I heard the car door opening, I lost it. I screamed like a little girl as I somehow managed to unlock the garage door and bolt outside, climbing up the driveway ramp. By that time, heavy rain had started pouring down. I hopped over the gate and ran to the nearest house, yelling like a lunatic for the neighbors to rush outside. They came out in shock, and I explained to them the whole situation, almost out of breath and soaking wet. In the meantime, I heard sirens in the distance. 2 police cars rolled down the street and I practically ran into the officers' arms, screaming that there were 3 strangers in my house. 4 agents went into my house, guns drawn, while another one took my description of the events. Those 3 men were all gone, though, and to this day I don't think they've ever been caught. Some antiques which held some value were stolen. However, I must say it was no big deal for my family. For the remainder of the night I couldn't sleep at all. I kept tossing and turning, jumping at the slightest sounds, ruminating relentlessly on the horrific experience. But I kid you not, another chilling surprise was lying in wait. When morning came, I spotted a small piece of paper sticking out of the edge of my bed. I picked it up and went frozen stiff. The following words were written: "Bye-bye, beauty, you look cute when you sleep." When I was around 14 or 15 years old, I was home alone one afternoon, and I was loving the freedom. My parents had taken my younger brother to a full-day event, leaving me behind. I had the whole house to myself, and I enjoyed it more than I probably should have. I'd only been left home a handful of times before, and I was used to having my family around, so this felt like a small taste of independence. I was bored, and one of my friends was having people over, so I figured I'd swing by. My parents had told me specifically not to leave the house while they were gone, but I didn't think much of it at the time and didn't listen. I grabbed my jacket, threw on my shoes, and headed out. Looking back, I can't believe how careless I was. I didn't lock the door when I left, which in hindsight seems like an obvious thing to do, but I was too excited to see my friends, and locking up wasn't on my mind at all. I was out for a few hours, and when I came back, I knew I had messed up big time. When I walked into the kitchen, I saw that the cabinets were open, and stuff on the counters and table had been messed around. I started calling out, "Hello," hoping that whoever had come inside was gone by now. I didn't hear a response, so I began looking around the living room and kitchen to see if anything was missing. Just as I was about to head upstairs to check, the home phone rang, an unknown number calling. I stared at the screen for a second, unsure whether to pick up. Maybe it was just a spam call or some telemarketer, but I answered it anyways. On the other end of the phone was just deep, heavy breathing. After a few seconds of breathing, I said, "Hello, who's this?" Once again, I asked who was on the other end, and in the middle of my sentence, I was cut off by the voice on the other end, which said, "I'm in the house." I tried to play it off, hoping that it was just a prank call, but I responded by lying and saying that I was home with my family and there wasn't anybody in the house. The voice on the other end responded and said, "We both know that's a lie," then abruptly hung up the phone. Next, I heard a quiet creaking from upstairs. I once again yelled out, "Hello," and I heard whoever was upstairs pick up the pace. The footsteps ran down the hallway towards the stairs that I was standing near. I was worried that they were coming for me now, and I went through the back door and bolted towards the woods behind the house. I knew that I had to get as far away as possible. I didn't stop running until I got to a neighbor's house, who let me use their phone to call the cops. When the police arrived, they found the door wide open, just like I'd left it when I ran. They didn't find anyone in the house, but they did tell me that it seemed like someone had been there, obviously. So, whoever it was who had broken into my house and potentially wanted to hurt me got away. I refused to be left home alone for many years after that day. It was about a year ago when my parents and sister went out of state for a sports tournament, and I was left alone in the house for 3 days. I'd never been home by myself for that long, and I thought it would be nice to have some peace and quiet. The first night went by without anything out of the ordinary. I watched a couple of movies, made some popcorn, and went to bed around midnight. I didn't think much of it when I woke up in the middle of the night with an uneasy feeling. It was not anything specific, just a weird sense that someone was watching me. I shrugged it off and went back to sleep. The next day, everything seemed fine. I spent most of the time inside just relaxing and watching more movies. By the evening, the feeling started to creep up again, like there was someone there even though I was alone. I checked the house to make sure that all the doors and windows were locked, and everything looked normal. I even walked around the yard for a bit to see if anybody was outside, but I didn't find anything. By the time the third night rolled around, I was starting to get a little jumpy. I woke up again between 2 and 3 a.m., and I heard footsteps outside. It wasn't anything loud, just faint footsteps like somebody was walking on the gravel path outside. My heart started to race a bit, but I convinced myself it was probably just an animal, maybe a raccoon or something. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I couldn't fall asleep again. So I grabbed my shoes and flashlight and I went outside to check things out and ease my mind. I walked around the house, shining the flashlight around, but there was nothing. I was starting to feel stupid about going outside alone in the middle of the night when I heard something from the woods behind the house. It was faint, but it sounded like a branch snapping, like something was walking through the trees. I don't know what made me do it, but I walked towards the sound. As I got about halfway from my house to the edge of the woods, I heard a loud, blood-curdling scream. I don't know if it was an animal or human, but it's a wild area behind my house, and it could have been a fox or a mountain lion. Either way, I freaked out, ran inside and locked all the doors and windows. I peered through the curtains, trying to see if I could spot anything or anyone. I opened the curtains to a man standing close to the window, staring directly at me. As soon as he saw me, he turned and sprinted towards the woods. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, so I stayed up and watched more movies. And thankfully nothing else happened that night. When my parents came back the next day, I didn't tell them what happened. Since then, I've been home alone 5 more times, and I've never seen the man again. I don't know what he was doing, and if the scream I heard was related to him or not, or just a coincidence from an animal, but it was a scary night. Suddenly on the other side of the door, I heard a man's voice say some curse words and the banging stopped as he ran away, hearing the aggressive dog barking. I didn't call the cops or anyone else, which is probably the dumbest thing I've ever done. I just sat up for the rest of the night with the wood bat in my hand. My brother came home that morning and I told him what had happened. We went to the basement door to check it out, and when we gave it a tug to open it, the whole door fell off. This psycho was one good shove away from getting into my house, but old Cecil scared him off. My fat, lazy old dog could have very well saved my life. When I told this story to people, they dismissed Cecil's actions as a dog doing what a dog was supposed to do. But I will tell you that Cecil never barked or moved that fast in his life. It was almost like he knew the urgency, like he knew that the door was going to give in soon. Suddenly on the other side of the door, I heard a man's voice say some curse words and the banging stopped as he ran away, hearing the aggressive dog barking. I didn't call the cops or anyone else, which is probably the dumbest thing I've ever done. I just sat up for the rest of the night with the wood bat in my hand. My brother came home that morning and I told him what had happened. We went to the basement door to check it out, and when we gave it a tug to open it, the whole door fell off. This psycho was one good shove away from getting into my house, but old Cecil scared him off. My fat, lazy old dog could have very well saved my life. When I told this story to people, they dismissed Cecil's actions as a dog doing what a dog was supposed to do. But I will tell you that Cecil never barked or moved that fast in his life. It was almost like he knew the urgency, like he knew that the door was going to give in soon. It was around 8 p.m. on a Tuesday when this happened. I was at home alone with my 3 dogs just lounging on the couch watching TV. The house was quiet except for the occasional bark from my dogs as they moved around the room. I was on FaceTime with my friend and we were chatting about nothing important, just filling the time. Then I heard something. At first it was faint, like a rustling sound coming from the backyard. My dogs immediately perked up and started barking towards the back door. I muted the TV and turned towards the window to look outside. I watched as a man approached my sliding glass door. He stopped and stood there, facing my back door, looking right at me through the glass. The dogs were going wild by this point, barking and growling. Even with the dogs barking at him from the other side of the glass, the man didn't move. He didn't even look towards them or acknowledge them, just stared through the glass directly at me. I told my friend on the line what was happening, and she urged me to hang up on her and call the cops, which I did. The man didn't move, and my dogs kept barking, but he didn't seem bothered at all. His eyes never left mine as he smiled, and it wasn't a friendly smile. He also kept mouthing something at me through the glass. I'm not the greatest lip reader, but to me it seemed like he was mouthing "Don't look away" over and over again. I just sat there staring back at him, waiting for the cops to arrive. It was so unsettling, but I didn't want to leave the room and lose sight of him. The man never did anything else, though. The whole time he just stood there staring at me with that eerie smile, his mouth repeating those words, "Don't look away." Finally, after what felt like hours, I heard the sirens in the distance. I was hoping that the cops wouldn't use their sirens so that maybe the man would be caught. The cops were pulling outside, and everybody in the neighborhood knew it with their lights and sirens, including the man outside my sliding door. He took off, and the cops couldn't find him nearby. I haven't been home alone since then, and I never want to go through that again. Every time I look out that back door now, I picture the man standing there staring at me. One night back when I was 16 years old, I was home alone and in my bedroom. Both my parents went out for the night, and my older sister was staying over at her best friend's house. All my friends were busy, so I was just up in my bedroom playing on my computer. At about 9 or so, I remember that I thought I heard a noise from outside near the front door. It sounded like somebody was possibly trying to open the front door. I figured my parents might have been home early, so I didn't think much of it, but after like 2 or 3 minutes, I never heard the door open, and I realized that it was strange. Then I heard the same noise again. At that point, I got sort of a nervous feeling, so I decided to go down and see. Obviously, it was late to be getting anybody at the door, and I never heard a knock, but my bedroom was far away from that part of the house, so I wouldn't have heard it very clearly. Soon I made it to the front of the house and then to the front door. When I got there, I looked out of the window, but nobody was in sight. I also went and looked out of the other front windows and saw nothing at all there either. I wasn't really sure what I had heard or thought I had heard. I couldn't really definitively say what it was, so I went around to a couple more windows and looked out of them as well, just to be safe. Everything seemed fine, so at that point I decided to go back upstairs. I figured that if anybody had been at our front door or on the property, they had left. It was probably just somebody at the wrong house, if anybody was even there at all. So I got back up to my bedroom and then went inside and sat back down at my desk. Within a minute or so of being back at my computer, I had started to take my mind off what happened. I was feeling good and no longer worried about it. But then I heard another noise. This time it was unmistakable because of how loud it was. Somebody was knocking at the front door. Instantly, I was really nervous. I got up from my desk and left my room again. This time I slowly made my way downstairs. I was nervous to see who was at the door because at 9, it wouldn't be a salesman and probably not one of my friends. But I hung on to the hope that maybe it was nothing weird or creepy. When I got back downstairs, I walked over to the front door area. I was careful not to be in the way of the window to let whoever was there see me. But when I got to the front door and looked out, nobody was there. I went over to the front window again, which had a better view. Nobody was there either. I was really confused and also creeped out. I was telling myself that maybe it was just a prank. Nothing like that had ever happened before, but possibly some kids were playing ding-dong ditch or something. I stood around for a few more minutes looking around. That's when I heard the strange noise at the back door. I don't really know how to describe it, but I knew that somebody was there. If someone was at the back door, they would have gone all around our yard, which was fenced in, so I knew they were up to no good. I was really freaked out to go and see who was there, but for some reason, I did. I walked over to the back of the house, moving slowly and trying not to freak out. When I got into view of the back window, I just barely saw something. It looked like somebody was moving away from the back door and going further into the backyard. It was really dark back there, so I couldn't see much. I went over and looked around, no longer seeing them. Then I turned on the back light. For a second I saw someone moving out of sight behind the trees. There were some trees partly in our yard and partly in the neighbors'. For some reason, somebody was back there. I kept watching for a little while, and they did not return. I opened up a back window a crack and called out, "Hey, who's there?" There was no response, so I figured that they got the hint that I saw them and left. I thought about calling the police but didn't because I figured that the person was gone, so I closed the window. I then made sure that the back door was locked and decided to go back up to my room. I hoped that my parents would be home soon. I walked back upstairs into my bedroom. The whole time I was just paranoid that the guy would return, but I was telling myself that he wouldn't. When I got back to my bedroom, I looked out of a back window into the yard and still saw nothing. So I sat back down at my desk again. I tried to distract myself from what had happened and focus on the computer again. After maybe a couple of minutes, I was starting to feel slightly better. All of a sudden, though, I thought that I just barely heard the sound of the back door opening downstairs. I first went over to the window and looked out. I couldn't really see the back door from that angle, though. I went over to my bedroom door and listened closely. When I did, I couldn't hear anything. By now, I was seriously considering calling the police. However, I just wasn't 100% sure of what I had heard. I thought maybe it was just my imagination from me being paranoid about what had happened earlier. So I decided to go downstairs. I quietly left my bedroom and tiptoed down the hallway and over to the stairs. When I got to the staircase, I looked around and saw nobody downstairs, so I went down them and was still looking around and feeling paranoid. When I finally got downstairs, I first headed over to the back door. Incident at the house. When I got there, I could not believe what I saw. The door was wide open. I didn't see anybody in sight, though. I went over to the door and closed it. Then I stopped and listened. I heard nothing. I called out again, trying to sound tough, and I said, "I already called the cops, they'll be here any minute." However, I didn't hear anything in response. Of course, I hadn't called the police. I wasn't sure if somebody was in the house or had already left. I went around towards the living room to look around. When I did, I was sure that I heard footsteps a little ways away. I stopped where I was. The footsteps were moving through the dining room and towards the kitchen. I stood there in the living room, too scared to move. Then I heard the footsteps seeming to approach me from behind. I looked back and just barely saw a shadow of someone starting to come around the corner. At that point, I just bolted up the stairs. I ran like crazy and went all the way into my bedroom. When I got inside, I slammed the door shut behind me. I ran to my bed and pulled the covers on top of myself. Then I called 911 on my phone and told police that somebody had broken into my house. After giving them my address and hearing that they would be there shortly, I just waited. It was now complete silence. A few minutes went by, then I heard a quiet knock at my bedroom door. I was too scared to move. I stayed where I was and didn't do anything. The door didn't open though. Several more seconds went by. I thought that I heard footsteps in the hallway, just barely. Then I stopped hearing them. Several more minutes went by. Soon the police got there. I went down to talk to them, and whoever had been in the house was gone. The back door was still open though, and the strange thing is that nothing was stolen or anything. My parents got home a short time later. Nobody ever figured out who it was. It still creeps me out when I think about it to this day. I live alone. This is something that happened just a few months ago, so my apartment is pretty standard for the most part. However, the front door opens right up to the outside and there's a small grass area there. To the right of that is the parking lot. Then there are several levels of units. Mine is on the first level. I was at home one evening after I'd gotten back from work. I was in the kitchen cooking and right in the middle of that my doorbell rang. I wasn't able to go over to the door right away, but I stopped what I was doing and then went over there. This was maybe 20 seconds after the bell had rang. When I got there though, I didn't see anybody. I looked out the window to as much as I could see, and there was nobody there. So at that point, I just went back to cooking. I didn't really know who it could be or why somebody would be ringing my doorbell. I figured that it was most likely someone at the wrong apartment though. Nothing else happened for a while. Several hours later, I was in my living room just hanging out. Then the doorbell rang again. I remembered from before and wondered if that person was back. Then the doorbell started ringing again and again, a bunch of times really fast. I was so confused. I got up and started walking over to the door. In the time that I was going over there, the doorbell ringing stopped. Before opening the door though, I made it to the window and then looked outside. When I did, I was surprised to see that nobody was there again. They had been ringing my doorbell so many times in a row, like they really wanted me to answer, and now they were just gone. I didn't know what to make of it. I looked around for several minutes but didn't see anyone. After that, I went back to what I was doing. I only stayed up for maybe another hour, if that. Then I was tired and decided to go to bed. I started turning off the lights in my apartment, but before heading to my bedroom, I went over to the front door and looked out of the window one last time. However, this time I saw something. There was this tall and kind of thin man just standing there a few feet away from my door. He wasn't facing me, but kind of to the side. He didn't appear to really be doing anything though. The guy was wearing all black clothing and I had no idea who he was. I thought that this was maybe the person who kept ringing my doorbell. It just seemed really suspicious. Though I watched him for several minutes, the man just stood there and sort of looked around. Then he started walking away slowly. He went in the grass area out front and then he walked across the quiet street that was there. After crossing, he walked right into the woods. There was no path or anything, he just went right in, and the woods there are very thick. I was so confused and also creeped out. Since then, I haven't had any more strange doorbell rings or anything. I also haven't seen the guy and I'm still wondering who he is and what he was doing. I'm also wondering why he just went into the woods like that. This happened when I was in high school. I'm a male and was 14 years old at the time. I lived at home with my parents, and one Thursday afternoon I got home from school at the usual time. Normally both of my parents would be gone for a few hours after I got home from school. They would both still be at work, and they worked in the city. So on this afternoon I had a little bit of homework to do, but not that much. I went up to my bedroom to get it out of the way. My room was upstairs in the house and on the back side of it. As I sat up there doing my work, about 20 minutes into it I heard a car pulling into our driveway. I thought that it was either my mom or dad arriving home early from work. I paused what I was doing and got up to go downstairs and say hi. However, after getting to the main level of the house, I looked out of the front window to see a random car in the driveway. I had never seen it before. It was a fairly large SUV, like a Chevy Tahoe, and was black in color. Right after I noticed it, I saw the doors open up and 4 men got out while one stayed in the driver's seat. At that point, I moved back quickly and away from the window. I'd never seen any of these men before and didn't know who they were, but they were all headed towards the house. And they didn't look that friendly either. It just looked sketchy. The men did not go to the front door though. Instead I noticed through a side window that they were going around towards the backyard. Then the car that was in the driveway backed up and left. I ran back to my room at that point to get my phone. When I did, I looked out of the window and saw the men all going towards the woods in our backyard. We had a large woods mostly on our property that was towards the back end of it. After all the men entered the woods, they were completely out of my sight. I called my parents and they both said that they were on their way home but stuck in traffic. They told me to call the police, so I did. A while later, the cops arrived and I told them everything that I could. They searched the yard and the woods a little, but the men must have left because they didn't find them. After that, my parents got home and soon after the cops left. Nobody really seemed to know who the men could be or what exactly they were doing. I was just really glad that they were gone. So then, fast forward to the very next day. I got home from school again, and much like the previous day, I was home alone. My parents were not back from work yet, and I went up to my bedroom where I usually hung out. As I was in there, I noticed something out of my window though. I saw one of the men from the previous day. He was standing in our backyard just outside of the woods, and he appeared to be looking up at me. It creeped me out so bad. I instantly ducked down and then called the police again. they came out once more and searched the property again. However, just like the previous day, they didn't find anybody. After that, though, I never saw those men again. I still don't know what exactly was going on there. Who were those guys, and why did they go in our woods? It remains a mystery to this day. This happened back when I was 12 years old. It was the summertime and I was at home by myself. Both of my parents were at work, and this was probably in the late morning. I just remember that it was a really nice day outside, so I went into the front yard, and I was reading a book in a chair that we had out there. After probably an hour of this, I remember noticing a car driving down our street. A few cars had already gone by that I had noticed. We lived on a quiet street that wouldn't get very much traffic, mostly just people who lived there. This one car, in particular, was going very slow. It was a black four-door sedan, and after passing by it went further down my street and then out of sight. I didn't think too much of it, but only about a minute later or so I remember the car driving back from the other way. When it passed by our house it seemed to slow down even more than it was already going. I also did not recognize the car, and I couldn't help but feel a little bit suspicious. The car ended up moving on and leaving the street though. At this point I was hoping that it was just somebody who was maybe lost, so I stayed outside and kept reading. However, less than 5 minutes later the car was back. It once again drove by and was going very slowly. I just had a bad feeling about it. The car luckily passed me by and continued down the street. When it did, I decided to go inside of the house. After getting inside, I think I went to the kitchen to get something to drink. I was going to go to my bedroom, but before that, I stopped at the front window. When I did, I saw the same car sitting in our driveway. I couldn't believe it. The car was parked at the back end of the driveway, and I could not see who was behind the wheel, but I did see somebody in the driver's seat, and it appeared to be a man. I watched the car and it continued to sit there. Nobody got out. I didn't really know what to do, but I remember that I soon moved away from the window. I walked around the house. I don't really remember why, but when I returned to the front window I could see that the car was now empty. The man had left it. I didn't know where he had gone though. I looked to the front step and nobody was there, so he wasn't going to knock at the door or anything. I went to another front window and looked out, but saw nothing there either. At that time I was trying to figure out what he could possibly be doing. I couldn't think of any logical explanation though. I went to go back to my bedroom. When I got inside though, I saw the man at my window, just outside of it. We locked eyes for a brief moment before I quickly ran away. I ran into the kitchen to get the phone and call 911. However, when I did, I saw the man running away past another window. He then went around the house and back to his car. As I was calling the police I could hear him driving away. I went through with the call anyways though. The police came out to our house and I spoke with them for a while, telling them everything that I could. My parents got called and came home from work early. It was one of the craziest moments of my life. I'm really glad that the man was unable to get inside. After that, I never saw him again. This story happened to me in my first year of high school, many years ago. First off, let me premise by saying that I clearly understand how dumb of an idea this was. But I was a younger kid, and I didn't think it through fully. I just imagined that it would work. My parents had left to get my older brother from his friend's house because he had gotten hammered and was too drunk to drive himself home. It was around 11 at night and I did what normal things a boy my age would do, watched TV, played video games, and invited friends over when I wasn't supposed to. After my friends left my house, it was around 12:30 a.m., and my parents called me and said that they wouldn't be home until morning due to my brother passing out and needing medical attention. He had to go to the hospital due to alcohol poisoning, and by the way, he ended up being all right and recovered fine. I was 15 years old, home alone the entire night for the first time ever. And in the midst of puberty, I decided that tonight would be my night. I went on some online hooker website and I found an attractive 19-year-old Asian woman who said she would do just about anything you could think of. So I hit her up and gave her my address. I told her I was about 3 years underage, and she said it was fine if we kept it a secret. It was around 1:45 a.m. when I heard a knock on my front door. I looked through the peephole and saw an attractive young Asian woman standing outside. She told me her name was Ashley, and asked if I'd let her in. Letting my hormones control me, I let her in. She asked if she could use my bathroom first, and I told her that it was fine. While I waited for her, I looked at the car she arrived in, and in the faint shadow of her car, I saw another person sitting in the passenger seat. They were wearing all black clothing and looking at the house. I thought I was just imagining things, or that maybe it was normal and this was her driver who was just going to wait outside the whole time. 10 more minutes went by, and she still hadn't left the bathroom. And as I was waiting, I heard footsteps walking through the rocks into my backyard. I was beginning to panic now, realizing how this was a terrible idea and I shouldn't be letting random people into my house. The motion sensor lights in my backyard kicked in, and I went to take a look. And sure enough, it was the person I saw in all black before. Once they noticed I could see them because of the light, they booked it back to their car. The girl, who then came out of the bathroom, said that I scared her partner off and that she was going to go out and get home alone. When I was 12 years old, I lived with my parents and older brother. We had a 2-story home in a pretty typical neighborhood and I liked it a lot. One night, I was left home alone by myself. My brother was over at a friend's house and my parents would be gone until late, so I invited a friend to come over and hang out with me. It was my friend Jason, who lived just the next street over, so he could walk to my house. However, at around 9 p.m., he had to leave my place and go home because he wasn't allowed to stay out later than that. So, we had been up in my bedroom playing video games and I said bye to Jason and he left out the back door. I stayed in my room. I heard him leave, but only about 5 minutes later I heard our back door open up again. I figured that Jason must have forgotten something and came back to get it, and I didn't think much of it. However, I did not hear anything else for a while. I would have assumed Jason to walk right back up to my room or something. I stopped what I was doing at that point and listened. I didn't hear anything at first, but then after a few seconds, I heard somebody walking through the main level of the house. This person was headed toward the stairs, and based on the way they walked, it seemed like a larger person or an adult male probably. I could just tell that it wasn't Jason. I was now very creeped out. It certainly was not my brother or my father either. I almost called out asking who it was, but I decided not to. Moments later, this person, whoever they were, started walking up the stairs. That's when I got very freaked out. I closed my bedroom door all the way quietly, and then locked it. Soon after, the person made their way up to the top of the stairs and started walking down the hallway. I did not know what was going to happen. I didn't have a cell phone at the time, so I had no idea what to do. The person walked around the hallway upstairs for what felt like forever. Then finally, they walked back downstairs. When this happened, I knew it was my chance to call the police. I walked over to my door carefully and then opened it as quietly as I could. I then ran to my parents' bedroom, which had a phone in it. After getting in there, I closed the door behind me and locked it and then called the police. I didn't really hear any sounds from the main level of the house anymore. After calling 911, I hid under my parents' bed until the police got there. When they did, surprisingly, the person was still there. It was a man who I did not know, and the police arrested him hiding in the basement. It was a huge relief. My parents got home soon after. The man had entered the house through the back door obviously. I think he must have somehow seen Jason leave and maybe thought that Jason lived there and the house was empty. I really don't know though. I have no idea where he came from in the first place. It was very creepy.